Welcome dear learners once again to this session on institutional repositories. We have with us Dr. R.K. Chadda from the Parliament, and he has been telling us about this concept of institutional repositories. In the earlier session we had a long discussion about why institutional repositories, and in that we had discussed how we are observing a change in the formats of presentations and what are the changes that are there in the publication and printing of the information. We have also seen how things have been moving towards making things easy for our users. We are trying to make information available in a user friendly way. We are trying to provide this information in a customized fashion, and towards this is another step, that is in the setting up of institutional repositories. This is a step towards overcoming the information barriers. This helps us to democratize access towards information, and thus this is a welcome step. In the last session we ended up with the definition of institutional repositories, and we continue with the institutional repositories. I will hand over to Dr. Chadda.
Thank you, Jaydeep. As we discussed in the last session, if you look into the definition of digital institutional repository, it is basically digital collections capturing, preserving and providing access to the intellectual output of an organization. Now it can be a single university or multi-university community, and when we talk in the context of university, we can very safely say a university-based institutional repository is a set of services that a university offers to the members of its community for management and dissemination of digital material created by the university and its community members. So it's basically the organization of the information of an institution, and this is being given to the members of the institution or the members of sister organization, or even to the outside world if information is made accessible to the public. So let's look into, we have been discussing earlier, if you look into the old system or the printed word, in case you bring out a publication, in case you bring out a article or a, some scholarly work, it used to be the publisher's responsibility to disseminate the scholar's work. And printed article was the predominated format of any record. And other scholars, they have to search. In case it has been published into a journal, into a printed journal, then if you are looking for the information, we are used to have abstracting surveys, we have to indexing surveys, and publisher has to go on shifting the pages of journal articles, journals or books, just to know what has been published, who has published what. And basically it was not in the hands of scholars, it was the hands of publishers. That's why people used to look for a good publisher. Okay, if it is published into science or nature, it will go into many hands, but if it is published into a journal which is not very popular journal, people may not notice it also. People may not know it that such and such work has been published. So everybody used to queue up for a good journal, so-called popular journal or so his work is given more and more publicity. And if it is published and if it is old data, then certainly it used to be a very difficult job to look into abstracting services, indexing services, kind of a thing. But then the things have changed. And now the effective of, if you look into the new system, that the contribution measuring has become absolutely different. Now it is that how many people are accessing your information, that effective dissemination of work is now in your hands. It is not that sole responsible is the publisher. You yourself can forward the publication to many hands, and then it can be easily networked, or it can be easily put in the hands of people, and that's why it gets more popularity, and more people are able to take care of, understand your publication. What is basically, when we talk about a typical institutional repository, what exactly it is? Let's see what goes into an institutional repository. If you look into, these are the published papers, the preprints, the conference papers, and these are the current publications, then thesis, datas, images, the conference proceedings, the conference photographs, all these kind of things, they become part of that repository of institutional repositories. On one side you have articles or the conference papers, another side the data with the thesis or even the institution data, how many students are there in IGNOU, what is the kind of a percentage of passing, or how many people pass every year, what is the overall functioning of IGNOU. These are the data important. Then the national data. The data may be like population data, census data, and all these are part of your institutional repositories which are going into the system. Now what exactly is the institutional repository? It is, if you look into the institutional repository, and if you want me to tell you in a very simple ways, I can say it is a traditional library. It is exactly the traditional library, but the format is different. The format is non-traditional. That means it is something like the library we had, which was on the stacks or which were in the form of books, journals and all these things. But here the format is a little different. The format is digital format, or what we can say is it is not the traditional format. It is a multimedia digital format. Now the advantage of multimedia digital format is it is accessible to everybody, and it is easy to put more and more information. It is easy to update the information, and that it is what we call is an active archive is allowed. You can go on putting the information, you are going on updating the information, and that can be made accessible to everybody. So the same library, but without boundaries, without time limits, in a digital format where the things can be done at a very faster pace. So if you look into the role, if you talk about that I have to create a digital library, the role is same. It is exactly the same. You have to collect the information, you have to look for the information. Of course, here the information has to be collected in digital form. The same information has to be organized. We have to find out a way of preserving the information for the long term preservation, repurposing the objects, and then these digital objects have to be organized in the best possible way so that people can access it. Now, this is what I try to explain you what exactly is a digital library. If I, in the simplest term, it is the same library but in a different format where you are keeping your all the data to make it accessible to the users. The users can be within your organization only, it can be the researchers outside also, it can be a general public also. That depends what exactly kind of a repository you have created. So when I say these things, that means you have to be very careful when you are planning a repository. See, what is basic purpose of a repository? It is it a repository which is, there can be a repository of the some repository where only the student material is kept. So it is basically for nobody else but for your students which are within your campus. Or it can be a repository where you want to share the information with the research organizations of similar type. It can be a repository which Parliament has created where we are committed to give information to every public. So this you have to very clear that what is the purpose of our repository, whom does the repository has to serve, who are its user, and what kind of a relationship you are going to have with your user or with your library. So these are the basic issues which you have to keep in mind when you are creating a repository. You have to be very clearly saying purpose, the users who are there, what is the relationship, what extent the repository organizers or the librarian, what kind of a role he will be doing, what kind of a role the contributor will be doing. These all things have to be made very clear. Is it the responsibility of the repository creator to go on collecting the information from different people, or is it the responsibility of the concerned teacher or a student to go on deposit the information? So these all things, these all concepts have to be made clear when you are creating an institutional repository. Who is responsible for what is your role, how you will publish the information, all these things have to be looked into and has to be clearly defined when you are setting up a repository. So these This is a basic concept. You know, it is same thing. When you are creating a library or when you are hosting a library, you make the rules that this library is only for your student. You don't allow the students of other universities. Same way, your repository, you have to say it is accessible to whom. Or here the job of purchasing of books is of librarian or a lecturer or a department concerned. Same way, the job of depositing the material in the institutional repository is of the person concerned, of the department concerned, or the librarians. These all things have to be made clear, or it is under the law of the university that everybody has to deposit a copy in the electronic format to the institutional repository. All these things have to be looked into. Now let's see what exactly goes into digital library. In fact, when we talk about a digital library in a typical university environment, we try to put intellectual output of faculty, students, staff of the institution. That means published papers, theses and dissertations, performance art, research work, teaching material, administrative records, library collection. And if you go a little further, it can even give linkages to the websites, which are the useful websites of which your students or your teachers may like to access. They can also become a part of your institutional repository. That means you are collecting your data, plus you are also giving information about other people also. Now the types of digital contents: referred research literature and preprint, conference papers, working papers, reports. The books are being published. Now whole lot of e-books are there, e-thesis, images, audio-video files, learning objects, data sets, digitized material. This is what you have converted in your library, what we call is a retro conversion material. These all kind of contents become part of your digital collection, which is very important for your digital library. But it's not that everything goes into that. It's not that you go on putting, you know, like stacking your digital library with a material which may not be very relevant, and it should not become a very heavily loaded material that people will feel like that so much of not required kind of things are available. See, you don't have to put many versions of a published paper, the first version, second version, third version. Data sets, notes, learning objects, email correspondence, course reserves. This one has to be very careful what exactly you are trying to put it on your institutional repository. So that means you have to be very clear cut concept has to be made. What goes on to the IR, what doesn't go on IR, that you have to set right, you have to decide from the beginning. So that is the kind of a concept you have to create before setting up a digital library. Now once you have decided, once you have planned that what exactly you are looking for, what are the objects of your digital library, what will go into digital library, how it will be created, then let's look into the benefits. What benefits it will give you? All the maximize the visibility and impact of the research of individual researcher, maximize the access of researcher at other institutes, can provide platform for preservation. Basically, what is the purpose of writing an article? Or what is the purpose of doing a research? This research has to be shared. This information which you have generated, which a scholar has generated, he would like to share it with others. And that, if today's word, if you are talking, a reputation of an institution is built, a reputation of a university is built on the basis of the number of research or scholarly articles an institution has brought out, institution has published. How much research work a university has carried out. On the basis of that, the institution reputation is being judged. So this institution repository is the best way to tell the reputation of your institute. Okay, we are doing so much of research, our research output is so much, our conference papers, our papers at big international conferences are so much. So that gives a kind of a the reputation to the institute, and certainly the institution gets benefited by this kind of institutional repository, because this becomes basically an image of the institution. Basically, it raises the profile and prestige of the institution, and it becomes institutional price and shop window. tomorrow if I have to put admission to somebody, I will look into the university who is bringing out maximum number of scholarly articles or who is doing wonderful research in different fields. That's how you will judge an institute. And these are the ways how you can look into that institution. It becomes basically a window for institution which shows that what kind of work an institution is doing for that. But at the same time, the researcher also gets benefited. His works become popular. People come to know that what kind of work a researcher is doing. It gets instantly disseminated. You don't have to wait for getting published into different journals and all. The moment paper is prepared, if it is put on institutional repository, your institutional repository is being accessed, people come to know, okay, this wonderful work is being done by so and so in such and such organization, and you don't have to wait for so many clearances, peer review, that and all this thing. Your work is immediately shown to the world. It can be judged by the world that what kind of work, what kind of research you are doing, you as an individual or you as and combined as an institution, what kind of research is going. Now, it is also useful to a user. Institution gets benefited, the researcher gets benefited, and the user gets benefited because he need not to look here and there. The reputation of institute, suppose it's a very reputed institution, so certainly the articles or the things published on the institutional repository of that institute will have a high level of scholarly communication. So you can find out what kind of material, what latest things are happening in your field in different organizations, and that gives you a kind of a easy access to the information. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. Institution gets benefited, the user gets benefited, the researcher gets benefited, and that's the advantages of any institutional repository we bring out. And above all, the whole community gets benefited because the combined effort of different users, they all get shown as a single window, and that visibility of the faculty work or the institution work come into the public, come into the other organizations. And the best part is library gets benefited because library gets all the material without in bargain. Everything comes to the library. I think when we'll discuss our institutional repository, I'll tell you how all of us get benefited with such kind of benefit. Maybe.
Yeah. So we have seen the benefits of institutional repositories, and basically what we have discussed up to now is that the institutional repository can be available at different levels. It could be created by an institution for its own people. It could also be made available by the institution to its sister concerns. And also the other option is that the repository may be available freely to all, irrespective of any limitations or boundaries. But why these different kinds of institutional repositories? An institution has to think in terms of its policies, its objectives, its limitations, and then decide out what type of institutional repository they are going to provide. We were discussing a little before also that the publisher might not be benefited, or he has no role to play in there when we are setting up institutional repositories. It is quite true for those publications that are born while creating the digital repository or institutional repository, but then it has a role to play for those documents that have already been published. You need to have approval, you need to have the rights from the publisher. So that is one issue that we have to think in terms of loading this material on the repository. The other is that we have been talking of that we will have contents, different kinds of contents on the institutional repository. It could be preprints or it could be printed also. It could be conference proceeding. And we have also said that the author need not to wait for the peer reviewing of the paper. For that you can have different options available in the repository, like you can have an option of preprints, the paper that have been loaded before it has been peer reviewed. It is a preprint paper, and then it could also be revised, or it could be uploaded after it has been peer reviewed. So you have different options. A paper carries weight before peer reviewing also, because ultimately what we are trying to do by creating this institutional repository, the most important part of it is we are trying to overcome that time barrier that used to be there earlier. So that we are trying to overcome, and at the same time we are also trying to provide this information freely available to one and all, irrespective of any barriers. So that is how we are able to overcome this problem. The other very important fact that has been brought out before us by Dr. Chadda is that this gives us a standing, this gives us a sort of the visibility to the outside world. This is a very important thing that he has brought out, and at the same time another important thing is not only outside the institution, I think within the institution also. How many times do we really know where our colleagues are publishing, what has been published by them?
Absolutely.
That too is a really a fact that we should not ignore. And by these repositories we come to know of what our colleagues are doing, and we are able to share with them their experiences and thus learn from them. So that is how these institutional repositories are going to build learning organizations, which is very important for building a knowledge society. I think you would agree.
Yeah,
Dr.
that's absolutely. Now let's come to the issues. What are the issues if you are, if you are trying to create an institutional repository as a professional? If you accept that this is your role, it is your job to create institutional repositories. The important thing comes, what are the issues in creating? You have to be have very carefully designed collection policy. You have to have preservation policies, and more important is intellectual property rights. You have to look into the copyright issue, IPR issues while you are designing or you are making your institutional repositories. Yes, you are bringing a lot of changes, a lot of cultural differences and changes. Faculty participation is very important, and your role as a metadata provider or to index the whole thing, to organize the whole thing, which is very important. And above all, it may be very easy to create a digital library, but to sustain it, to keep it for a very long time, it is an issue which has to be looked into from the day one when you are planning to set up an institutional repository. So all these angles, all these concepts have to be kept into mind the moment you decide to create a digital library in your organization, and these issues have to be dealt in a very, these all are delicate issues, and they have to be dealt in a very systematic manner so that things don't go hayway. You have to be very clear what is the submission criteria, who will do, when it will be done, and what will go into that and what will not go into that. Is it voluntary or is it mandatory? Is that you must deposit the things, or it's your choice, you want to deposit, fine, you don't want to deposit, fine. What is the responsibility of user community? Then comes the file formats. What kind of file format? Will you go only for Word files, or you will go only the Microsoft based file structure, or you will go for what are the file structure you will be going into? Then the level of access, whom you are providing, is a mixed, is a restricted, it is only to your students, or it is to general public. All this have to be done. You have to create metadata standards, you have to assure the quality. So you go for a standardized kind of a system where the metadata is created in a very, very systematic way. IPR issues are important. Will you go for multiple repositories? That means there will be institutional repositories, you will create subject repositories also. Who owns it? Whose ownership is this? What about the items which you put in your institutional repository, which you take it from outside? Sometimes it happens that you look for, you start creating a repository, especially in case of subject repositories which are created in the institution. You bring out the material from outside and then create subject files or subject repositories which can be useful for you. And then more important thing comes is who will run it, library or your IT department. Whether you would like to have the responsibility or the responsibility is given to IT department so they can take care of your repository. Who will pay for it? The money comes from central funding or it's being raised by the library. These are the policies issues which has to be linked into. That important thing is that what about the withdrawals? Do you allow the withdrawal? Suppose today a teacher is there, a professor is there in the university, and his material has been put into the institutional repository. Tomorrow he leaves and joins another university. What happens to his data? The articles published by him, whether you take out all the details or he is allowed to take it to the institutional repository where he joins next. These all things have to come into the institutional repository before when you are creating policy, and that you have to look into it, that how best it can be done. Most important here is the IPR issues. You see, anything we are creating, we have to be very careful with the copyright things or intellectual property right things, because they may create problems in the longer time, or with the passage of time, they may create problem. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's take, for example, today I have written an article, I give it to institutional repository, but tomorrow I publish the same article into a journal, in a journal which is brought out by a commercial vendor. I suppose put it into, let's say, in the Science or Nature, I publish it. But at the same time, I had earlier given it to my institutional repository, or it can be vice versa, that I would like to publish my journal first in the journal and then give it to institutional repository. Who owns the copyright? Who is responsible for it? Now, these are the issues which have to be looked into, especially for holding it and then copying it. Tomorrow, suppose some scholar wants it and he want to make multiple, he want to copy it, download your article or so. Who gets paid for it? Whether the publisher, commercial publisher who has published it, or it is the institution who in case has a policy to charge it. So these are the issues which have to be looked into when you are designing, when you are planning for a institutional repositories. The storage, that means the holding, and at the same time the distribution rights have to be looked into. Who is allowed to hold it, who is allowed to publish it, and who is allowed to distribute it further. Now, this is a very important, that we have to have a deposit license. So what is happening in this kind of environment? We are having basically two licenses. When we look into the legal arrangements by which the contents get distributed, typically an institution repository may have two licenses. One is the deposit license, that is an agreement between the creator or the copyright holder and the institutions giving the repository the right to distribute and preserve the work. Another is distribution, agreement between author and the creator or copyright holder with the end user governing the uses that can be made of the work. So these two agreements are different agreements that has to be looked into. What has been seen in the institutional repositories case, that publishers usually agree to an author's request to retain right to post content to the website or the institutional repository, and these rights, they permit you to make put it on your institutional repository, but at the same time they normally don't agree to give it distribute the material, because there the publisher loses the revenue. So that what happens is, at the time of submitting the paper, one signs an agreement, the author signs with the agreement, and then in that agreement it makes it very clear that the institution will get a right to hold that particular item on the institutional repository, but then it is published by the commercial publisher who makes use of for further distribution or for further copying, then the payment is made to the commercial publication. Now, there is another issue. In 2003, the UK copyright law has been changed, and following that, a number of countries have changed, revised their copyright law, and under this revised law, copying, we had a concept of fair use or fair copying in the libraries. But this concept of fair dealing or the fair copying or the libraries copying has been changed tremendously. Now, what is the change? If you are copying a particular article or a particular information for the purpose of non-commercial activity, that means for your personal consumption, for your personal research, then this can be considered under the fair use. But if the copying from a library leads to a commercial activity, then it is it's an infringement of fair uses. Earlier the fair uses was that if you are copying from the library and it is for the purpose of making use in a different thing, it was permitted. But now the concept of fair uses has been changed in the new law. If it leads to a commercial uses, that means you are making a commercial use of the information for which you have to pay to the publisher. Now, what will be this commercial copying? If you look into research relevant to R&D in a commercial company, that means if a commercial company comes and copies material from your library, it is not a fair use. It is because the research being conducted by a commercial company will lead to a product which may be a very costly product, or which may be a commercial product. So then it is not treated as a fair use. Market research or competitor intelligence in organization, searching for legislation and regulation for a commercial company, because tomorrow you search a legislation, you look for a regulations, what are the laws, what are the systems and all this thing in different countries, in your country, and then on the basis of that you open your own company, you lead to a commercial activity. So that means it is not a fair use. So this wheresoever this end result is a commercial result, this will not be it will not be covered under the fair use. So this is the new thing which has come. Now if you look into what are the fair use, the fair use is where R&D in educational establishment which is not related to any commercial venture. So more important today is that what it will lead to, whether it will lead to a commercial venture or commercial return, or it is a purely non-commercial venture. This is how the things are now being judged in the new copyright laws which are there. If you look into the old laws, the authors hold the copyright till 50 or 70 years depending on the different countries, and author used to get royalty for the copies printed and sales, and authors used to, in the case of journals, author used to transfer all his rights for use and copy in distribution to the publishers. And today the things have changed. There is a total shift from that, where the fee goes to the publisher, and but in case the uses doesn't lead to a commercial thing, then fair uses, it comes under fair uses and you can allow the copying of the material. Now with this institutional repositories, what has happened? The libraries have become publisher. Today in this model, when we talk about the model of institutional repository, what exactly has happened? We as a librarian has taken a role of publisher. We are publishing the things, we are basically hosting the things on our repository, on our server, and this is providing the access to the researchers. Practically it is an open access model where people can access to your material free of cost, and this is another kind of an open access model where people are accessing to your information. So the libraries have taken a role of publisher. Library has also taken a role of university press. Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press. So if what they used to publish, they used to publish the reports or the articles of the university scholars or their researchers or their scholars. But in institutional repository model, this role has been taken by the libraries. The library has become publisher, the library has become university press, and this has brought a different concept. This is a total cultural shift from the traditional system where universities used to either give it to the commercial publisher or they used to publish themselves, and then they used to sell it and used to keep copyright laws with them, copyright rights with them for this thing. So this has given a new philosophy to our thinking. Now this all has to be looked into, this all has to be kept in mind when we are planning an institutional repository. Coming to how to create it. This is what we talked. We talk about what is a institutional repositories, what are the policy issues we have to keep in mind when we are setting up institutional repository, what are the different IPR issues or the legal issues which we have to keep in mind, and if all we set, we change our role, we become a different institution now. On one side, we are buyer of the information, libraries are the buyers of the information, we purchase information from different sources. At the same time, we ourselves have become publisher, we have ourselves become taking a role of a university press, we have taken a different role. On one side, we are a buyer of the information, on other side, we are a publisher of information. So two roles now a library is taking. Now, how to set up? There has to be. It's not just, if I decide tomorrow I make a policy. The issue comes, what are the software? How best we can do it? From where the money will come? Now, these issues have to be looked into when you are planning to create a institutional repository. Now, the issue will come whether you would like to go for an open source software or you would like to go for a commercial software. There are a number of software available in the market which are available in the open source. They are free software, and there are certain software which you have to pay for it, which you have to purchase and you have to go for it. This is very important when you are creating a institutional repository. And above all, which is most important, as I said in the beginning, we have to look into the sustainability. If you are setting up a repository that you are spending on technology, your server may have to be replaced every third year, fourth year or fifth year. You have to go on updating your software. You have to provide the linkages. You have to provide access to people. Your server has to run 24 hours. The security of your data, virus attack on your data, a whole lot of issues have to be looked into. Whole lot of technological issues have to be looked into. It is not only for setting up, but for sustaining it for a very, very long time, because this has become a kind of a responsibility of the library to host the data, to keep the data and to organize the data, and then to give access to the data 24/7 by 365. That is the another important thing which you have to keep into mind, and you have to go on replacing the hardware, you are go on updating the software, you are go on increasing the bandwidth, because more and more speed is being coming up every day. Maybe you'd like to add something here?
So we have seen some very important issues that we have to look into while we think of creating a institutional repository. And the first and foremost important is that there are some organizational and management issues, as he has raised very important issues like who is going to be the manager or organizer, whether it is the library or the IT department, who is going to be the owner of the digital library, then what sort of contents have to be put in there in the digital library. We have to be very selective. You cannot load each and everything, because then again it loses its importance. It results in the access is also slow. So therefore we have to take into consideration, these are very important aspects. It depends on the purpose of our repository, what sort of materials we have to load. Those which are more important, considering into the ease of access, this is a very important issue. Then a cultural issue, I think this is still more important, that we have to see that the people are ready to contribute to the institutional repository. It is not that easy, because it's really a cultural shift. People would like to resist. They won't like to put up their material on the institutional repository. I give you a very simple example. When a person is evaluated, he presents that these are the papers that I have contributed. These have been printed. These have been published by these journals. These are well-to-do journals. These have a recognition in their field. And that a person will not be able to tell, will not be able to say. So you have to make them realize, yes, this carries weight. You can say that this has been published in the institutional repository. It's not a matter. So they have to be persuaded to publish. Then again, when you say persuaded, is it going to be optional or it's going to be compulsory? Can you force them to publish in the institutional repository is a very important issue. You can't force. So this has to be made a way of life. I think with time people will agree, they would like to publish in the institutional repository. This is a contribution for the institution, this is a contribution for the society, this is a contribution for the public at large, this is a contribution for the humanity as a whole. You are providing your expertise, your knowledge, you are sharing with one and all. You are trying to provide not only to those who really can lay their hands otherwise also, but to the less privileged, to the underprivileged also. Then there are some technical issues also, as again he has very rightly pointed out that regarding the software and hardware, all these details also have to be sorted out, but then again it depends on the resources, ways and means of the institution also. Then there are some other important issues, and again it is very important whether who is going to own that material. That means right now I am part of an institution, I provide my material for the institutional repository, and when I leave, would I like to take that with me? Would I not like to give it to the institution, or would I like that to be loaded for the institutional repository of the institution which I am going to join later? This is another important issue. Then the issues of IPR, like fair use, that is an important thing. But then a question comes to my mind when I say it is not to be used for commercial purpose. How do you really monitor that this is not to be used for a commercial purpose? I use it for my research, academic purpose. Later on, I can provide a contribution for a commercial purpose also. So it's very difficult to really track and monitor whether this particular knowledge is used for commercial or research purpose.
Yes, these issues are there. In fact, implementation of IPR issues is not that simple as it looks to be. Fair use, we had long debate. For years together we have debated what exactly is fair use. Today we have changed the concept of fair use, because today the copying has become very easy. The transmission of data has become very easy. It is not as difficult as used to be earlier. We had a concept of interlibrary loan, we had a concept of, that preprints, e-prints, and all lot of cumbersome processes were there. And in those processes we didn't have much chances of misusing the published information, because it was really a tedious job, and one who is really looking for the data or information used to be after it, and that controlling IPR issues were much comparatively easy than today, where copying, transmission and everything is so easy, so simple, that just by a click of mouse you can copy the information or transmit from one place to another place. So issues are really complicated. It's not that simple, and that's why that's implementation of IPR issues is a very big challenge throughout the world. It may be, our laws may be very stringent, but may not be at other countries. They are so strict about IPR issues. So there are a number of issues. It's not a simple thing, that we agree. Now coming to, since we are running out of time, we have hardly 1 minute or so. When we are talking about institutional repositories, the important thing comes is the software. As I said, we have a number of software programs available in the openware. The open source free available software is available, which are standard software, and more popular softwares are ePrint, DSpade, CDSware, Fedora. These are the popular software which are being used by many institutional repositories at the national and international level, and number of institutional repositories projects have been started. In fact, if you look into national level, a number of projects have been started, and then they have gone to the institutional level, the subject level. There are subject repositories, there are institutional repositories, all kind of combinations are available. People are maintaining the different repositories, and if you look into the examples, I can show you a number of examples. Here we have an example of digital newspapers, which is a very specialized repository of newspapers. So basically, what I want to conclude with is that institutional repositories really provide an excellent platform to expose research and scholarly work, and as it will go on evolving, I think we will be getting more matured with the concept of institutional repository, and we will be able to support the contents, we will be able to contribute in more effectively in the institutional repositories, but we have to be careful about the preservation, the standardization in the storage, metadata, and interoperability. These are the few issues which are being discussed, because it's not as old concept as would have been. With that,
really it was a very nice discussion. We are thankful to you, sir, for having come here and enlightened us on this particular topic, and hope to have more such discussions in the future. Thank you.
thank you.